Hello, everybody, and welcome to the GMS Magazine podcast and YouTube channel. If you're watching rather than listening to our podcast, this is the RPG interview room, and I am PACO GARCIA, your host. This is a show in which I am lucky enough to get together with people from the world of role-playing games to talk about anything and everything to do with publishing, writing, designing, etc., etc., etc. I have always been very curious about transferring from novels to role-playing games and vice versa, because we have seen an awful lot of those in the past. Then we're seeing a period where we haven't really seen that many, and we are again seeing that trend happening. We've seen it last year with Carnival Row, we've seen it with The Witcher, we have also seen it with Altered Carbon, with The Expanse, Lord of the Rings. We've seen it with so many IPs, but I reckon that it's not just as easy as saying, well, let's paste some mechanics and mechanisms and some rules, and that's the end of it, because the flavor of the original has to be taken into consideration, and that takes some skill. Now, I have with me today Erik Scott de Bie, a insanely experienced novelist who has written an awful lot of D&D novels and been able to get everything he needed from the game and the setting, the world, and transfer it into novels. And I wanted to ask him and talk to him about what does it take to do that? How is it? How easy, how difficult it is to actually manage, and what are the steps to take. So, without further ado, my dear friends, here is Erik. Erik, welcome to the show. It is so absolutely exciting to have you around, seriously, after I don't know how many years of interacting with each other in Facebook and saying cool things.
That's right, we have been friends for years.
I know.
We've never actually talked or had one of these interviews. It's amazing.
It's the magic of Facebook, that we get to, get together with people, and yet we never talk. But we are going to sort that one out. Today
Absolutely.
Is a magical day when we actually become true internet friends.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to it.
But okay, since I haven't really interviewed you ever, and I've only interacted with you online, which is pretty cool. But I don't know what your ability to answer questions actually is. So
okay, well, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, don't take this personally. I do this to absolutely every single person who comes to the show. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions.
I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Right, okay. Question number 1. Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Okay.
This is my Seahawks 12th man mug, because I am in Seattle, and I am a bit of a loyalist, so I always drink tea. I have had maybe 5 cups of coffee in my life, and I hated it every single time. I don't know what it is. That's a weird thing, because I live in Seattle and I don't like coffee. I like people who like coffee. I think coffee smells great. I just do not like it. It's weird.
Yes, I think the issue you're having is that you're looking for taste. When in reality, most people who like coffee, what we look is for effect.
Yes.
As in the effect of staying awake longer and being sharper and, being slightly happier. So
maybe this is why people drink Budweiser beer. I don't know.
Well, I drink beer because I need to pee, and it helps a lot. So.
Hey, I love beer too, but I'm in Seattle. I drink microbrews, so
I love that. Okay, right. Second question.
All right, that one was easy. All right, let's
take it harder. Take it harder. Right.
Okay.
Cars or motorbikes?
Ooh. Do you mean for me or for my characters? Because I am really big. I'm 6'7", which for Europeans is about 2 meters in height.
You are never ending. I mean, you're the kind of people who give neck problems to normal humans. You're
Absolutely.
very tall.
And back problems to myself. But I look a bit comical on most motorbikes. So I drive cars, but I love my characters driving motorbikes.
Okay, fine.
So
okay, that's a very fair answer. The mountain or the beach?
Ooh. I really like the mountains. Okay. I like hiking. I like camping. at least some of the time. When it starts raining really heavily, it becomes problematic.
Yeah, it can be sluggish and annoying. Right, okay, this is getting harder now. Fantasy or science fiction?
Yeah, that is hard. I think I come down on the fantasy end, but most of my work kind of blends genres. It's always fantasy based, and then it will have science fiction elements or horror elements. I wrote a fantasy western once. It was very cool.
Right.
But yeah, generally fantasy.
Okay,
I think.
Good. That's a very good answer. And the last question: zombies or vampires?
To have as my neighbors or what? Okay, vampires.
Okay, good.
Vampires.
Good. Perfect.
I'm not a big fan of the sexy vampire trope. I tend to like my vampires being monstrous and scary. Like 30 Days of Night vampires are the ones that I prefer.
Yes, I am happy with that because I was traumatized the day I saw a sparkling vampire.
Yes.
And you know what? I'm not kidding about this. I genuinely did not expect it.
I do think that vampires both vampires and zombies are very creepy in different ways. Zombies are representative of, a certain human impulse to just consume and consume mindlessly. Whereas vampires are, to me at least, in our modern day, representative of predatory impulses in humans to prey upon one another, and in a very sexual predator sort of way. So it's a problematic fave that I have. That's what we're saying.
Well, I don't think that's anything wrong with having that's a problematic. I prefer vampires to zombies. Don't get me wrong. I love me zombies because of what they represent. But
I don't think that's what vampires represented initially. When Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, it was sort of an allegory about the upper classes literally feeding on the lower classes, and a bit about sexual awakening and agency in an age when that was very frowned upon.
I agree.
The Victorian age. So
yeah,
vampires have kind of evolved since then in the public consciousness.
Yeah, and in some cases been degraded very badly. But anyway.
All right.
I guess this could be a whole podcast episode talking about vampires. We should do that sometime. But today,
I like vampires. All right, moving on.
Okay. The reason why, and we discussed about this coming to the show, is because you have a wealth of experience creating novels based on IP. You've done novels for an awful lot of people from IPs that pretty much any role-playing gamer will know at some level. And it is something that's always fascinated me because I don't think we see it often enough anymore. We used to see an awful lot of novels based on Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games in the 80s and 90s, and we saw a lot of role-playing games based on novels. Dragonlance was one of the first things that became from adventure to novels, and look where it got them. And yet, we haven't seen that for a very long time so much. We're starting to see it again, with Altered Carbon and The Expanse happening once more, and Game of Thrones is happening again. But I am very curious as to what does it take and how do you start from a character that already exists and to turning it into a role-playing game character that people can actually use for their own purposes and their own stories, because there must be a massive difference in there.
It is quite different, because when you're writing a novel, obviously you have a great deal of control. You can control how a character starts acting, how they react to things, how they feel about things, anything and everything about how that character interacts with people. Now, but when you're trying to give instructions for how to play this character at your table, it's much harder. Because in my mind, if you take a character like Shadowbane, who's the star of 3 of my Forgotten Realms novels, I understand him very well. I know exactly how he thinks, how he works. I know about secrets that have yet to be revealed, and might never be revealed because Wizards destroyed their book publishing line. Anyway, but I have Shadowbane 4 half written. Call me, Wizards. Okay. So I understand him quite well. I know his motivations. I know him as a person. He's like my son, right? All my characters are like my children that I have produced. There's one of my cats wandering past me. Hey,
well, mine is around as well helping. Oh, hello.
Come say hello. He's really old, but he's very handsome.
Beautiful, gorgeous thing.
All right.
Oh. So we have our assistants around because my cat will probably walk up in and out of camera at some point, seeking attention.
Cats keep derailing my my answer here. But I think the key to adapting a novel character to the game page is very similar to the key to adapting a novel character to a movie or a movie character to a novel, is to focus on what is most important about that character, what is key and iconic and that people can connect to about that character. Okay. So with Shadowbane, it's focusing on his conflict between his noble impulses and his dark, shady past. Because he grew up as a pickpocket and a beggar, essentially, and then became a noble paladin trying to rid the world of evil. So it has produced this kind of pragmatic, but still good aligned person who does what is necessary to get the job done. But there are certain lines that he won't cross, and there are certain lines that he dances along, right? And so these are the kind of things that end up on the page. Okay. There's also a certain element of you have to let go of how much you love the character and how much you think the character would do a particular thing, because people at their tables are going to play the character however they want. Every character means something a little bit different to everyone. Mm-hmm. So you just kind of do the best you can to give the clearest instructions you can, and then just, see what happens. Or okay. Don't see what happens, because, I'm not at most tables. So I have no idea how many people have murdered Shadowbane, for instance. I have no idea.
Absolutely. Or turn it into somebody who you really didn't think Shadowbane could at all become. Now, the one thing that strikes me when converting characters into role-playing games is a character when, as a writer, you create a character, or at least mine, they tend to be really flexible characters in as they are going to evolve in one way depending on how the story goes,
Right.
Even if we follow sort of formula as tried and tested as the hero's journey,
they have story arcs, they have progression, evolution. Yeah, correct. That's necessary to creating a character that people will love.
Correct. But when you turn it into a role-playing game character, something changes insofar as you have to take one glimpse of that character to turn it into the role-playing game character, and then you're going to lose control of it. Because, people are going to take it and they're going to kill them, they are going to torture them, mind them, change there's everything around them if they so choose to do so. Yeah. How do you choose what is the right photograph, for lack of a better word, to take of that character to present to people?
Well, my answer to that one is similar to my answer to the previous one. You find the best, most representative moment of that character. But also, you need to think of characters, and I mean you in the general you, DMs need to think of characters as tools to be used for your story. Ultimately, when you're playing a role-playing game, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the PCs are the stars of your game. Yes. The characters that the players are playing are supposed to be the stars of your game. And if that's not the case, it's usually because you're playing a game that's set up to invert that expectation, right? You're playing a game where your characters are, people who got mixed up in this accidentally and then don't end up having that huge impact, because that would be a huge inversion of the expectation. So against that, if you assume the PCs are the heroes, then all of the NPCs are only there to move the story.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm presenting an NPC that I've used in a novel or that someone else has used in a novel, what I need to do is I need to think of what their role is, what they need to do in the story, what their utility is in the story, and then pick a snapshot of that character based on what I need them to do in the story.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. So I wrote an adventure for the Moonshae series. So there's a series of Moonshae-based adventures on Adventurers League, I think it is. It's going to show up on the Guild fairly soon. Anyway, which uses Ildar Nathalan, who is a character that I used in one short story many years ago. And he is an elf blade singer. And there's a lot to that character. He only appeared in the one short story. And then he has a cameo later in one of my other books. But when putting him in, I said, okay, what do I need him to do in the story? And that tells me what to focus on. I need him to be basically a wandering messenger who is on another quest, and the PCs can help him, hinder him, or distract him from his quest. Like if he joins them and then dies, then his quest still needs to be completed, right? Someone else needs to go do it, or not. And if it doesn't happen, maybe something bad happens in the overall game.
Okay.
So I picked a time in his life and a characterization of him based on what I needed him to do. So that's it's like, because when you go from a novel, characters are people, to going to a game where characters are devices. And in a novel, characters are devices to an extent as well. One needs to be able to use them for the best story. Murder your darlings is usually the advice that people give based on this concept. That sometimes a character's purpose in a story is to be used up and then discarded. This happens a lot in Game of Thrones, for instance. Martin kills off characters when he's done with them, when they've served their purpose to the story. And all of us could use that knowledge a bit.
Yeah, I think Martin, in his case, I think he does it a bit too often. I reckon that it's a bit.
You are not wrong.
You know, I think he has this a Kleenex complex of characters. You know, they're there to use and throw, and it's a bit. But wait a second. I mean, I get it, and then, you know, everybody can do whatever they like. But if you start to kill your characters so often, people start to look forward the way they're going to die rather than the way they're going to evolve, and death becomes meaningless. You know, it's not like when in the first book of Dragonlance the dwarf dies, which was truly traumatic. Sorry, people, spoilers.
Spoiler for a 40-year-old book, yeah.
Well, you never know when people haven't read it.
You never know.
Oh my God, the dwarf dies. We just kill somebody's childhood.
It's a good book. Go read it. All right.
Oh, yeah. So it becomes kind of meaningless, whereas the trauma of death, and I reckon that probably goes with our society a little bit, that we don't value life as much as we used to 40 years ago.
Interesting.
I don't know. I think that. So, okay, the idea of kill your darlings, but is that really what characters should be poised to be, even if they are, you know, redundant at some point?
All right. Well, when I say kill your darlings, this shouldn't necessarily be taken literally. Okay? You don't need to kill characters all the time, but you need to maintain a certain distance from them so that you can do terrible things to them or discard them when they're no longer useful. Have them retire, have them leave, have them go off stage and no longer be necessary. Because if a writer absolutely falls in love with a character and continues to write that character, continues to mold everything around that character, it runs the risk of getting repetitive and annoying, right? That's where that's where the Mary Sue and Gary Stu concept comes from. A Mary Sue is not an overly powerful character. A Mary Sue is a self-insert character from the author. It's someone that the author is like, I love this character. I am only writing about this character because I want this character to solve every single problem ever without any challenge of any kind. That's what a Mary Sue is. Stop calling Ray a Mary Sue, you assholes. Anyway, but the thing is, like, when you're when you're writing a novel or you're running a game or you're shooting a movie or whatever, you need to create opportunities for the audience to become invested in your character. And that's several things. That means you see your character succeed at things, you see your character struggle with things, you sympathize with your character. They go through struggles that you understand, that you might have gone through in your own life. And if you kill off too many characters too rapidly, you start putting holes in that emotional connection, right? And then it eventually frays and tatters and rips apart, and the audience is left without anyone to connect to. If all your favorite characters are dead by the Song of Ice and Fire Book 4, then who are you supposed to connect to? The bad guys? Well, I mean, yes, that's how that book works. But so, and then in a novel, if everything is all about one character and they are the only one who ever solves any problems, the only one who ever does anything in the plot, the only one with any agency, then eventually, unless people absolutely love that character, unless you build a cult of personality around that character, which has been known to happen in times, then the audience is going to drift away from it because they don't have any variety. They don't have any, and nothing about the book surprises them anymore, because you know your main character is always going to solve whatever problem is faced with them. Some books that are very keyed around a particular character, like let's talk about Harry Potter, for instance. Harry Potter is entirely from Harry's perspective, except for a few small chapters here and there, which are like behind the scenes things that are happening. Because if they didn't have those chapters, you'd have no idea any of that was happening, because Harry is not a very intuitive or perceptive person, right? And he faces numerous challenges, goes through numerous struggles and things you can relate to, but he doesn't solve all his problems. He is not the driving force of all the action in that whole series. Hermione solves most of the problems, honestly. And even Ron does some things that are useful from time to time, or at least provides an interesting disruptive influence on the story. So that providing that variety and group dynamic is very important for a character.
Which I'm liking what you said regarding the character coming back time and time again and becoming really repetitive, because that has happened in Forgotten Realms novels.
Let's talk about Drizz't for a second. Okay.
Okay, and
So,
this is not to bash on Bob Salvatore's work at all as a writer or
I
anything.
am absolutely not going to do that.
But it is. I mean, it's a character that's been going on for nearly 40 years as well, and Bob keeps coming back to it and keeps loving it, and people keep wanting more of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about Drizz't is that when Bob, first of all, I am good friends with Bob, and I am gonna make sure that he doesn't come and break my kneecaps once this interview is finished. But I actually really like how Bob uses Drizz't, so we're gonna talk about it for a second. So when Bob originally created Drizz't, he was a sidekick character. The main character of the Drizz't story was intended to be Wolfgar, but sometimes characters surprise you. They become more interesting, more compelling than the person you originally intended to be the main character. And Bob embraced that very quickly. And it was a lightning strike moment. It was exactly the character, exactly the story that people wanted at the time. And it made Wizards a lot of money. So Bob continued to write about Drizz't, but and like you said, there have been novels going on. I think the first one came out in 89 or 90, so it's been over 30 years that Bob has been writing Drizz't. And from the very beginning, Bob has put in other characters around Drizz't who are having adventures, solving problems, doing other things. Drizz't has a lot of agency. There's a lot of story that's solely about Drizz't. And for the first few books of the series, he was the guy who was solving all the problems. He was the guy who was driving the story. But as you go forward, eventually, when you got into like Spine of the World, for instance, or the Silent Blade, and then you started getting into Artemis and Truri and Jarlaxle doing stuff, and Drizz't never even showed up in those novels. It's because he had been building these characters from the very beginning. And now, if you read modern Drizz't novels, I just read Timeless a couple of weeks ago. Drizz't is important to that story, but he's not the plot driving element in that story. He is an emotional driving element in that story. It's about his relationship with his father who showed up in like the 4th book and then died in that book. And yet now, 200 years later or whatever, he is back and doing stuff. And it's really cool the way that has all come together. To some extent, it seems like he might have too many characters at this point, and he moved a bit. He took a bit of action to kind of push away a couple of those characters. But I mean, I think he's doing really great stuff with Drizz't and the Drizz't family of characters. And that's exactly what you have to do to maintain a single story over that length of time, is you have to diversify it. And part of that is his own interests. I mean, I know Bob loves Drizz't, but also he wants to tell other stories, and this is his vessel for doing that. So, I mean, I think it's gone pretty well. And Drizz't is a popular punching bag for all the things wrong with the realms, but really, those books kind of hold up in a lot of ways.
I think I haven't read all the novels. I've read the first few when they came out.
There are a lot.
I know, but I read the first few when they came out and they were translated in Spanish, so many years ago. And then I read the last one I read was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I did see a massive difference. And as you said, he's not a Marisu at all. He's not mega hyper powerful. He still has his vulnerabilities. He still has this sense of naivety around him. He still has this sense of, I'm still discovering shit around myself, around me, and my past is still coming to haunt me. So yeah, I think it's a good example of how a character can be reutilized time and time and time again, and not be
Although he has learned both how to pick locks and a bunch of thieves abilities and some monk abilities. Oh my god. Well, in Timeless he's like, yeah, I could shatter tables just by stepping on them with ki. And I'm like, okay. How many levels does this guy have? A lot. All right.
Exactly. And let's face it, I mean, as writers, I think writers should be allowed to have some guilty pleasures,
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes
it's fine. It's fine. It's
want my character to do this cool shit. So okay, so let's bring this back into taking characters from IPs and turn them into role-playing games.
Sure.
We have also seen an awful lot of books and novels being brought into becoming role-playing games. And again, I think we don't see enough of that anymore. You used to see that pretty much on a movie-by-movie basis in the early 90s and late 80s.
Right, that was a great cash-in option.
Correct.
Every movie would have a video game, first of all.
Yeah.
Many of them were terrible, but
okay.
Like 99% of them were terrible.
Yes.
And then they would often have a video game or a book or both, right?
Correct.
or a role-playing game, or a book, or both,
Oh.
or a board game, or something like that.
Or something. I mean, come on, even Dallas has a role-playing game.
Yeah, that's a good example.
You know, how weird was that? Now we're starting to see that again. Let's assume that people want to take their favorite films, of which there are an awful lot of very, very good films. Go away. Sorry. Right now, and they want to turn them into their very own role-playing game adventures. You know, if people like superhero movies and superhero games, translating the Marvel MCU recent films into, you know, a Mutants and Masterminds game would be really, really good fun. How would you start doing that? What would be the first few steps that you have to take in order to do something cool with a movie and turn it into a role-playing game or an adventure?
Well, I have two things to say, and I'll start with the anecdote first, and then I'll come back to that question. I, for a time, worked on the Marvel Heroic role-playing game from Margaret Weis that came out in the mid-2000s. I think it was 2007, 2008 or so.
No, it was later than, no, I think it was later than that, because I was already doing the podcast and I interviewed Cam Banks at the time.
Yes, Cam Banks was very, very into it.
Yeah, 2011, I think.
Okay.
Or something like that.
That might have been. It was
It was about 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, I think it came out when I was very early going to Gen Con, and that would have been, about 10 years ago. Okay, so that game was very fun. It's a Cortex-based. The Leverage game uses Cortex. The Firefly role-playing game uses Cortex. They applied that for Marvel Heroic, and I was a big fan of that game. And they hired me to work on the Age of Apocalypse expansion,
right? Which
was turning out really well, a little wild, okay, because that series is a little insane. Yeah. So I'm working on it, and abruptly, the license gets yanked, and because Disney had seen that, as far as I know, Disney, which had then recently taken over Marvel, said, okay, so to maintain this license, you're going to need to pay us a lot more money than what you have been paying us. And the margins on role-playing games tend to be very, very small, as we know, minute.
Yes.
And there was no way Margaret could continue doing that. It's a great game, so much opportunity for expansion, but it just was not making that kind of money. It was not making Disney kind of money. And as a result, there was essentially no Marvel role-playing game when the MCU took off and made, sacrilegious amounts of money. And to this day, I still think that is an excellent encapsulation of those characters. And if you had an MCU-based expansion of that game, right, using potentially the MCU art, using MCU story arcs, that would be fantastic, and that would just rake in the money, particularly since role-playing is so hot right now. Thank you, D&D 5th edition, for invigorating the role-playing market. But they just haven't done that. And how would you do that? Go from movies to role-playing games? Well, The Expanse is giving us a very good example of how to do that. First of all, work with Green Ronin, because they are excellent and definitely deserve your business.
Yes.
All the people who work there are very, very sharp, and that they produce really good stuff. They also have Dragon Age, and they did a Game of Thrones thing. They have adapted some really great IPs into some really great games. Highly recommended.
Yes, and the DC Heroes as well as theirs.
Yes. I think what is key to that is, again, focusing on that core element of those stories and those characters and bringing that into your game. Asking yourself what appeals about these characters. What are they trying to convey? I think connecting on that thematic level is really what is needed. So that, because the idea of adapting something into a role-playing game is to trigger that nostalgia response. It's to trigger that same emotional connection that you had to the story that you're watching on the screen. And the way you do that is you boil down what is true and iconic about that character, about that story. Why did Infinity War work out so well? The Infinity War movie is radically different from the Infinity War event in the comics. But conceptually, emotionally, it resonates. It's still true. It's still accurate to what that story was about. That story was about loss and about coping with loss and about triumphing when the odds are utterly impossible. And so, I mean, that could make a really great game. And come on, Disney, let's just do this.
I will never understand why Disney didn't, instead of asking more money for it, said, you know what, we're gonna help you. Here it is. Just do it. And considering what Wendy's done recently and Carnival Row's done recently, the fact that people are starting to use role-playing games as a marketing tool. I think if Marvel, if Disney had done that and said, you know what, this is going to be, let's buy the whole Margaret Weis Productions company, and you're just going to, this is going to be part of our marketing team. That would have been unbelievable. That would have been incredible.
It's a great idea. I mean, I don't know if Margaret would be interested in selling to Disney, but the concept, the concept of using it as a marketing tool is amazing. There was recently news that Fantasy Flight Games, who's been doing Star Wars, the Star Wars role-playing game, has basically shuttered and laid off most of its RPG team. And the writing seems to be on the wall that it's Star Wars role-playing is done. Maybe Disney will hire that out to someone else. And I think they should, because there's a lot of potential there.
I agree. And there's so much work already done. And I tell you, I mean, people are screaming because of that, because it's a very good system, it's a very good setting, and to be honest, just the amount of information in those books they've been releasing is so good that I know a lot of people who are not into role-playing games who buy the role-playing game books just because of the data, because they love to read about the universe.
Yeah, because it's all there, right? It's all in one place. You don't have to browse Wikipedia for for hours on end to find your information when it's all in one place.
Exactly. So, and anyway, but who understands these corporate goons? They're weird. They're really
weird. I don't know what's going on. I hope that Fantasy Flight pulls out of it and recovers and does well, because as overcomplicated as they make some of their games, because they definitely do, they are still a great design company, and I have had many hours of fun playing it. I'm currently going to play a Roll20 Star Wars game, even as the Star Wars game is diminishing and going into the West and becoming less. And to mix my Tolkien into it.
Yeah, well, I think people should start, get the books, because...
Yeah. Well, they're all on sale right now.
Yeah.
You should definitely pick those up.
Yeah, it is really sad, really, really sad. Okay, right. We should be winding down now.
Okay.
We've been talking an awful lot, and I don't want to talk everything, because I'd love to have you back at some point.
Sure, absolutely. This was very fun.
Good.
Yeah,
so I have
you have
three
some tough questions for me.
Yes, I have three last questions that me and my cat want to ask you. Make up your mind. Go away. There's a reason why he's so clinging to me at the moment. People might want to know this, because we have a festival in my city called Fallas.
Oh.
And people around here in this part of the world, they are absolutely and genuinely truly crazy about explosives.
Mm-hmm.
So from the age, I'm not joking about this, from the age of
I
3, people will buy little crackers that they will give to their kids so they can throw the crackers away. And every single day they organize controlled firework displays and cracker and bangers displays throughout everywhere, which means that animals are really stressed out, because that affects them immensely. So That's why Wellington is being so clingy to me at the moment, because he's banging everywhere. But
Yeah,
anyway.
we have celebrations like that in the United States too, and
Right.
my dog really does not like fireworks.
Well,
Yeah,
imagine the 4th of July celebrations that you guys have.
yeah.
Tenfold between the
Oh,
1st of May, sorry, the 1st of March and the 19th of March, every single day.
oh man,
And
oh man.
and
Oh,
trust me, I've seen your fireworks.
yeah, and they're nothing
They
like
are
comparison.
nothing compared to here. Here, literally, the floor bounces and vibrates. It is insane. So,
Oh my
right.
gosh.
No, people should see it. It is an experience. It is an incredible experience. People should come
Okay.
and take a look. Right. Um, Question number one to wind down.
All
And
right.
this is one of the hard questions. What's the best advice that no one has ever given you?
Ooh. Ah. Hmm.
Told
The
you it was
best
hard.
advice that no one ever gave me. So I had to learn it the hard way on my own. Hmm. Let's see. Okay. The best advice that no one ever gave me was that the most important aspect of a writer, game designer, actor, any creative person of any kind, before talent, before connections, before wealth, although being independently wealthy is very important. Let's get that clear.
Quite handy.
Is persistence. Persistence. It is continuing to push through constant rejection, because rejection will be constant. If you're trying to hire an agent to sell a novel, you will get 20, 30, 50 rejections. And the key is to not take them personally. As rude as your rejection letters might be, you still can't take them personally. You got to just keep going. You have to know your own value, know how important your voice is. And I'm not just talking to the general you, I'm talking to you, Paco.
Well,
Your voice is very important, and I am so glad that you are continuing to push through against so much opposition.
Thank you very much. That means a lot, because
You clearly know the value of persistence. And
well, yes, I do.
and I want to convey that to everyone watching. Persistence is the key.
Yes, I
Unlike,
definitely.
except in romantic situations. In that case, persistence is a hazard. Don't
Yeah,
do
it's
that.
it's a creepy thing.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But in trying to get your work out there, keep pushing. Believe in yourself. Believe in success. Keep going.
That's a very
That's the
good
advice no one ever told me.
You are a very wise man. Right, okay. The second question, what's the best mistake that you would like to repeat again?
Oh man, the best mistake I would like to repeat again. Ooh. Man, Paco, you come up with difficult questions. The best mistake. Okay, pass. We'll come back to that one.
Okay, we'll come back to that one. And if you cannot answer it in this podcast, in the next one. Okay. Imagine that you have a time machine. You go back in time and you meet your 10-year-old self. And you tell your 10-year-old self, do not do this. What is this?
All right. Do not get so hung up on not making mistakes.
Okay.
Do not get so hung up on being perfect, because you are very smart and you are very academically gifted, and people seem to at least tolerate you, and you don't have any enemies. And so you think that life is just going to be perfect and easy all the time. And so when you meet adversity, it will cause a lot of harm to you psychologically. Be prepared for that.
Okay.
You will make mistakes. It is okay. So
Okay.
it is inevitable and it is okay.
I like those. I like those quite a lot. Good. Well, for the record, that second question, Neil Gaiman also struggled with it when I asked him that at World Fantasy Con in 2013. So you're not alone. You're in very good company, in fact. Erik, thank you very much indeed for being with me today. It's been an absolute
Paco. This is real
blast.
fun.
We will hopefully do it again, and it will not take long, I'm hoping.
Okay, excellent. I'd love to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I hope you've enjoyed that. I really do. We certainly have. As you can tell, I'm not in my usual environment if you're watching the video because of the coronavirus quarantine, but we are still doing things for you. So I hope that this has been interesting, because it certainly has been for me, and it's given me a newer, different perspective as to what it is like and what it needs to take an IP and transfer it into a novel and do it the other way around as well. Please do leave me your comments, because I would love to hear what you have to say about the matter. If you're watching the video, leave me the comments down there in the show notes. As well, please do leave a review in iTunes if you're listening to the podcast. And remember to subscribe if you are watching the video in our YouTube channel. Thank you once again for being there. I truly appreciate it. And I will talk to you very, very soon indeed. Take care.